Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. My guest today is Mr. Peter Ahearn, and with Peter today, we'll talk about the only case in the history of serial murder in which one of the victims is even more famous than the killer himself. We are, of course, talking about Andrew Cunanan and the murder of Gianni Versace in South Beach, Miami. Thanks for your time, Peter. Thanks for joining me today.
Great. Happy to be here.
Well, Peter, just to start off, can you let us know what your role in the investigation was? How did you get involved with this?
Well, as you probably know and everybody knows, it was what we would call multi-jurisdictional investigation that was happening all over the country. At the time, I was the number 2 in charge of the FBI's office in San Diego, California. And because of that, I had operational oversight of all cases and cases including violent crime, organized crime, drug trafficking. And as the number 2 person, I was responsible for overseeing the investigation. The most important part of this that got us involved was Andrew Cunanan was from San Diego, California.
Well, before we start going into the details, help me understand something. Was Andrew Cunanan a spree killer or a serial killer?
Well, I'm sure that's an issue that's debated. In my mind and in the mind of the FBI, he was considered a spree killer. He was not a serial killer that if you dive into the psychiatry of that whole issue, you would not see Andrew Cunanan as a serial killer with multiple victims for different reasons and things of that nature. He was a spree killer once he started. He continued on killing until the end. Just a few random victims, but he didn't plot, terrorize people as much as the first 2 victims. So we called him a spree killer because he just kept going, randomly acting and evading law enforcement.
Well, in your opinion, what started Andrew Cunanan's murder spree like that all of a sudden?
Well, there are a lot of theories behind it, but I think the most common one was when he left San Diego to go up to see his former friends and lovers, in that case it was Matson, and his friend and partner. I think what he was trying to do when he went up there was to get himself back in their good graces. They were friends, people he could talk to, and I think in trying to rekindle a relationship with his former lover, that didn't work out, and I think he kind of snapped, and at that point, started this spree killing thing, and I think a lot of that was just out of his being spurned and started him on this violent path.
Well, and another thing that puzzles me is Andrew Cunanan lived a normal life for like 27 years.
Correct.
And all of a sudden, he turned himself into a killing machine. Is that common?
Well, I think he had a lot of issues. Let's put it this way. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not going to comment on the fact that I have professional training in any of that. But he had a fairly good life, but he came from a troubled family. It was pretty clear. When we were in San Diego, one of our key issues we had to deal with was his mother, because she lived there, and the questions whether or not he would come back to San Diego. But yeah, he had a very good life, but he had a father that was abusive to his mother that he saw. And I think as the years went on and as his troubled mind started to really catch up with him, I think he started to snap, try to get back to the good graces of his friends up in Minnesota or Minneapolis. And that's when I think all that pressure finally caught up to him after 27 years. He was not a success. I mean, everything he tried to do, he failed. And I think a lot of that came to a head with him when he did the killings up in Minnesota.
Well, one thing that I don't understand is he killed 5 people pretty much for 5 different reasons. Because Jeff Trail was killed probably because they had an argument. Then he killed David Madsen because he had to defend himself.
Right.
Then he killed Lee Miglin probably for the fun of it. Then he killed William Reese to steal his car, and Gianni Versace just for the fun of it. Is it common to have a spree killer in this case who kills 5 people for like 5 different reasons or something of the sort?
Well, I think there are different reasons. And in this particular case, I think you're correct in the first 2 issues of the first 2 murders. After that happened, he was on the run. Okay. The question was, where was he going? You got to remember, I think this happened. He did not have a plan. When he went up to Michigan, to Minnesota and was in Minneapolis area, I'm not sure he planned when he went up there that it would end in the killing of those two individuals. Once that happened, then without a plan, because you have to remember, he didn't have any money, had no resources. He really found himself in the middle of these two murders, and then he started to run. The question then comes to mind, why did he go to Chicago? The family denied, that he had any relationship with Lee down in Chicago, but it was pretty clear that was someone who was maybe a former sugar daddy. He felt probably that he could get access to money. He got access to his car, and then when he went down there, and I think Lee, kind of shut the door on him, from what I understand. I think he snapped then too, and that's when the continued killing was going on and on. So again, he had no plan. This wasn't premeditated, or he would have had a plan and not necessarily just, kept going and doing what he ended up doing with Versace, which I don't think was the initial plan. It developed along the way, is what we thought.
And my last question goes hand in hand with another one. He used very different weapons, because in 3 cases, he used a gun. In 1 case, he used the hammer, and in the final case, that is actually Lee Miglin, so the third, he used a screwdriver, a hacksaw, and even duct tape. Is that common among spree killers?
Well, what we see common among murderers like that, a spree killer or a domestic violent thing, or even, if we want to even borderline psychotic, when he did the first murder, he didn't necessarily have access to the gun. The gun came, I think, later or after he found that, but he made it personal. You could tell those two first murder was very personal. The second murder, he did use the gun, but he had access to, I believe it was Matson's gun. And then from that point on, it just was personal type things. He had a relationship, I believe. The family still denies it, but I believe he had a relationship with Lee down in Chicago. And again, that was a personal type thing that happened there. Along the way, when he had the murder of Reese in New Jersey, that was something quick. It just happened. He used the gun there. He had no personal relationship with Reese. Thus he just killed him, took what he needed, and he left. I think the first 3 murders, he was sending messages, from the standpoint of it was personal to him, and again, we can talk about Versace, who I used the gun at the end of that too, but that's what happened. He then used the gun for something quick, unplanned, didn't even know the individual, just killed him for something he needed, took the car, and he left.
But why did he choose Versace as victim? Why was he so obsessed with Gianni Versace? Because they had nothing in common. I mean, probably Cunanan used to say that they met once, like 7 years before, and the meeting, by the way, was even very quick. So why was he so obsessed?
That never, whether or not that happened or not is still debatable. I think what you have here is, as he was going along his way and decided to pick Versace, as a victim, I think, his mind started to play. He was gay. Versace was understandably, everybody knew that he was gay. And I think Cunanan saw him as the king of the gay community, so to speak, somebody famous. And remember, Cunanan always wanted to be famous. He failed at everything he did. That his dreams were, I'd be famous, and he was always lying about what he had done in the past. I think he targeted Versace because of exactly who he was. He was famous. Probably the most famous gay man at the time that people knew, again, arguably. And I think he picked him as the victim so that he could live on, as the person that killed, Gianni Versace at the time, and make him famous as something I think he always wanted, to be famous.
And also, let's not forget that he killed 4 people in 2 weeks, and then it took more than 2 months to kill the 5th. So in that 2.5 months, he pretty much was hiding in plain sight. How could he do that?
Oh, that's one of the things in my experience in 29 years in the FBI. On any given day, there are probably over 15,000 fugitives in the United States, okay? Varying degrees, from, misdemeanor type cases to murders. We had some famous cases. It's not hard to hide, believe me. Not hard at all to hide, and that's part of the problem, trying to catch and do manhunts and catch fugitives. That's why you put the posters and everything else. I think in that period of the 2 months, again, remember, he wasn't prepared. He didn't have false identity. He didn't have any other way to hide his identity. And I think he just felt comfortable doing what he was doing until he started to hear what was going on with the manhunts. There's no doubt about it. But he was not prepared to handle any of this, quite frankly. He needed money, so what did he do? He took the coin that he got from Lee and pawned that. But again, I don't think you can put a time on a fugitive. We had a person in the United States named Whitey Bulger, who was a mob guy that was a fugitive for 15 years. Eric Rudolph, who bombed the Atlanta Olympic Village or the Olympics back in I think it was 96, or I may be wrong in the date. But again, he was a fugitive for 5 years. I mean, so people want to hide, people can hide. It's not that unusual. And again, a lot of times it's luck that you find people, and a lot of times it's skill. It can be very random in that way.
Well, Cunanan also took serious risks. For instance, he used his real name when he sold golden items belonging to Lee Miglin. Then he took a taxi to escape from the crime scene after killing Versace. And when he used Lee Miglin's car, he had his mobile phone, Lee Miglin's mobile phone, with him. So how could he do something so risky? I think we have three options here. He was either unaware of the risk he was taking, or he thought he could get away with it, or third option, he was so desperate he had no other way. What do you think?
Well, I think, Cunanan was like that. I mean, he was like that most of his life. He thought he was better than everybody else and things of that nature. I don't think he understood, with the tracking of the phones. I believe that was an issue that almost led to his capture. And there was an issue in Philadelphia with the media that caused that not to happen, quite frankly, as he was making his escape, and then led him to Reese, where he killed Reese. But again, carefree, I don't think he had any other options, quite frankly. If you're going to go and you're going to pawn a coin, if they ask you for your identity, gave the identity at the time, he was just becoming, a national figure. I don't even think at the time he was on the most wanted list, but he just took his chances, and I don't think he cared, or was it more like I want to be caught? But again, debatable, and only he could tell us that he's gone.
And then, after escaping for 2.5 months, he killed Versace, and then he decided to pretty much bury himself in a houseboat, thus condemning himself to death. Why did he do that instead of keeping running?
Her thoughts, every morning during this manhunt, okay, we would have a national phone call with FBI headquarters, and every office that was involved would be on those phone calls. So I was hearing the stories, I was hearing things that were happening, the good things, the bad things. There were sightings all over the place. You can imagine the amount of people saying, I saw Andrew Cunanan, but towards the end, I think what was happening was he was starting to realize, that circle of comfort was starting to kind of shrink. So you go on the run, and he didn't get far, but I don't think he could have gotten far with the way that manhunt was going at the time. And I think he saw in the travels over the weeks when he was out, possibly, that he found or saw this, houseboats, and what better place to hide, and easily break into and hide on a houseboat. And I think it was luck, obviously, when the people found him in that house and heard him and reported it to the police. So I think it was an opportunity. He saw it. He didn't think anyone would be checking houseboats. They'd be looking for him probably in a hotel if he had money, or some other way, or he fled the area. And that was always the concern. There was always fear that he fled the area. There was always fear in San Diego, that we were dealing with, that he was coming back to San Diego to settle a score with people he knew back there. So San Diego and the gay community were on edge the whole time this was going on, thinking he was coming back to settle scores. But that circle tightened on him. He found a place that he went in. The other thing I think is very important to realize is during these calls, we were counting bullets, so to speak. We never had any information that he had more than the bullets that were in the gun, quite frankly. And we thought this would end, if he didn't surrender, it would end either by what we call a suicide by cop, where he would come out shooting, or he would draw his gun on a police officer and let that police officer take his life, or it ended up the way it ended up, where he would take his own life, because you look back at his psychology and everything. I never thought he would give himself up after everything that happened, and the way he was such a narcissist in his mind. We were not at all surprised he took his life or wasn't coming out shooting and have the police kill him.
So there was no way of catching him alive. It was not.
Well, it was always possible if you could sneak up on him and take him. I mean, that was always the hope. Nobody wanted him necessarily to die. I mean, you look at that, if you could have, taken him alive, and of course the publicity of the trial and everything else, he probably would have ate that up. Quite frankly, the famous individual, he finally got fame by killing Versace. But in his mind and what he did, and it was a quick end, if you understand, when the people came in, he heard the noise, and I think that's when he killed himself before the police got there. And of course, they waited tactically because they wanted to make sure to try to take him alive, by trying to make contact with him, and of course, it was already too late. He had killed himself hours before.
So it wasn't a mistake by law enforcement agencies that led him to kill himself.
Well, no, I don't think so. But when you talk mistakes in any investigation, any at all, every one of them that I've been involved, we had that saying here in the States: hindsight, looking back, is a 20/20 vision. Did we look back at things and things that could have gone our way? Did the Miami Police Department look at things that they did that could have been better? For example, one of the areas I know they fixed after that was the issue with the pawn shop. Back then, there were no records or no computers that would tie in anything where somebody would pawn something. That information would go to the police electronically in a computer. Would have been quicker. Apparently, it did go, but it just sat because nobody was looking at records. It wasn't a priority at the time. So you can always go back and find mistakes. Okay, you'll never have a case that's perfect. And I think in this case, there were some mistakes made. There was some bad luck. We also have a saying too, Leonardo, that, in any investigation like this, I'd rather be lucky than good anytime, to be able to catch somebody like that. And luck plays a big role in an investigation as well as the skill. I think one of the biggest issues that hurt was in Philadelphia, where the press, got word that we were tracking a phone. They had their own sources in the police department, and they put that out over the media. And we believe Cunanan heard that they were tracking a Lexus and things of that nature, which led him to New Jersey, which was right across the river, to where he murdered, the person in the state park. And because he had heard that, it caused him to ditch the car, which we were tracking, and then we lost it. So luck and good are two separate things.
Very well said. So, of course, you guys had media pressure because of this investigation. And, of course, after he killed Versace, the media pressure, skyrocketed. Did that have an impact? If so, a positive one or a negative one?
I think it had a positive one. I mean, it was sad it had to come to that. I mean, when you're chasing somebody, it's a fugitive. You have fugitives that kill people, like what happened up in Minneapolis, and what happened in Chicago. These are just individuals. They kill people. There are, thousands of fugitives out there, maybe thousands, hundreds and hundreds that are wanted for homicide, for murder. So you're looking at that. But once you get that fame and that notoriety, one reason, for picking, Versace, it changes everything. Yes, the public pressure, does make a difference. People now pay attention, and some of those tips and some of those sightings came from people, that actually did see him, and they were followed up. But you can't get to it that fast. You can't just, transport yourself to where it happened. And there were a lot of near misses during this investigation for sure. But the media helped in that respect. On the other side, it did cause a couple issues, like the one in Philadelphia that, again, police scanners had the information without, and they figured he had heard that on the radio broadcast, which they were hoping the media would have kept that to themselves at the time it happened, but they didn't.
Well, I forgot to ask you something. When you have an investigation this big that involves many agencies, because you were with the FBI, but of course, you guys were working with the local police, with the U.S. Marshals and so on. How is collaboration between different agencies? Does everything go smooth and easy, or are there tensions?
It depends. As the years have gone by, especially after 9/11, the relationships are so much better. I worked in cases, after 9/11 with what we call our joint terrorism task forces, and these task forces put together with different agencies work so much better than they did 25 years ago. There's no doubt about it. But there were always those rivalries. I mean, I've been through so many of those, and the distrust or, and I think falsely, but I think the FBI, had the reputation back in the era of the Hoover days of not sharing anything. But we also learned, I learned early on in my career that, if you don't share something, then you're going to miss something. You have to get those relationships. And honestly, it's on the street, the relationships are always fairly decent between investigators. Sometimes when you get up to the bosses, there can be probably some more issues. But I think that cooperation is more important that we learned over the years, especially after 9/11, is much more important than the notoriety, and in this case, you have to remember too, the murder case came first. There's no doubt about it. The murder cases are pretty much the realm of local law enforcement. Miami, Minneapolis Police Department, Chicago Police Department, the FBI's part of this was to try to do the cooperation and the cross-border issues from state to state. Minneapolis has nobody that can chase somebody from, Minneapolis down to Florida. That's where the FBI, U.S. Marshals in particular, too, are very good at what they do in catching fugitives. And that work and coming together started to gel as the weeks and the months went by, I think, too much better. But I think it could have probably, you always find something they could have done better, Leonardo. There's no doubt about it. So not going to 100% perfect all along the way in an investigation like this.
Well, Peter, many thanks. We reached the end of what I had for you today. And I think you gave very precious information to all my viewers about this very peculiar case.
Yeah, interesting one for sure. Sad, no doubt about it. But so many of the cases are sad that we investigate. So.
Absolutely. 5 people died. 6 people died because Andrew Cunanan died as well.
Correct.
Let's not forget about it. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your time. Thanks, everybody else, for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.